Some mistakes we make in anger stay with us for a lifetime. Some doors we slam shut never open again, no matter how much we wish they would. For 40 years, Orla Venn has lived alone in the mountains with 14 black wolves, hiding from a world that once shattered her heart. Then one cold October day, a lost young woman collapses at the edge of her land. The wolves find her first. They do not attack. They form a circle around her and wait. When Orla sees the stranger's face, something inside her breaks open. The girl looks like someone from long ago, someone she lost. Why did the wolves protect her instead of driving her away? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I have saved something extra special for you. The morning began as it always did, with silence and routine. Orla Venn woke before dawn in her cabin deep in the Elkthorn range, the kind of darkness that settles over the mountains like a blanket you can almost touch. She was 68 years old, and her body reminded her of it each morning when she rose from the narrow bed she had slept in alone for 4 decades. Her joints protested the cold, her back ached from years of hauling firewood and water, but she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had long ago learned that self-pity served no purpose in the wilderness. She dressed in layers, wool-long underwear, flannel shirt, canvas pants worn soft with age, and the heavy sheepskin vest that had belonged to her husband. Even after all these years, she could still catch his scent in the wool if she buried her face in the collar. She did not do this often anymore. Some ghosts were better left to rest. The cabin was small but well built, constructed by her husband's hands in the early years of their marriage. One main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A stone fireplace dominated the western wall, its mantel decorated with objects that marked the passage of time: a hand-carved wooden wolf figurine that her husband had made during their first winter together, a bundle of dried sage, 3 smooth river stones she had collected from the creek that ran behind the cabin, and a kerosene lamp with a brass base that had belonged to her mother. The bedroom was barely large enough for the bed and a simple dresser. A ladder in the corner led to a loft where she stored supplies: dried meat, canned goods, extra blankets, and things she did not want to look at every day. Beneath the floorboards under her bed, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden in a wooden box, were letters she had never opened. They had arrived over the years, forwarded through the general store in Pinewood, the nearest town 12 miles down the mountain. She knew who they were from. She had never broken the seal on a single one. Orla built up the fire from the coals that had burned low overnight, added kindling, then larger pieces of split pine. The cabin warmed slowly. She filled the kettle from the water bucket and set it on the iron hook that swung over the flames. While the water heated, she stepped out onto the narrow porch. The wolves were waiting. They did not rush her or demand attention. They simply sat in a loose semicircle in the clearing before the cabin, their dark forms barely visible in the pre-dawn light. 14 of them, all black as midnight, ranging in age from the ancient alpha female, who was nearly as old as Orla's time in these mountains, to the 3 yearlings who still played like puppies when they thought no one was watching. "Good morning," Orla said quietly. She did not raise her voice. The wolves heard everything. The alpha female, whom Orla had named Sable, rose and approached the porch. She was massive, nearly 130 pounds, with intelligent amber eyes and a presence that commanded respect even from the human who had raised her from a pup. Sable touched her nose to Orla's outstretched hand, a morning greeting that had not varied in 12 years. The others followed in order of rank. Ghost, the alpha male, a powerful creature with a distinctive white patch on his chest. Storm and Shadow, Sable's daughters from her second litter. Ash and Ember, brothers from the same year. Dusk, Twilight, and Raven, the middle generation. Then the yearlings, Smoke, Flint, and Coal, and finally Obsidian, the smallest and most cautious of the pack. Orla had found the first wolves when she was 28 years old, 6 months pregnant and newly widowed. She had come to this cabin to grieve and to hide from a world that had taken everything from her. The wolves had been orphaned pups, their mother killed by a rancher protecting his livestock. Orla had found them whimpering in a den, dying of starvation. She should have left them. The wilderness was not kind to the weak, but something in their cries had broken through the numbness of her grief, and she had gathered them in her coat and brought them home. She had raised them on goat's milk and soft meat, sleeping beside them through cold nights, teaching them to hunt when they were old enough to learn. They had grown strong and wild, but they had never left her. When her daughter was born, the wolves had guarded the cabin like sentries. When her daughter was old enough to walk, they had shepherded her around the clearing, gentle as lambs with the small human who pulled their ears and rode on their backs. That daughter was gone now, had been gone for 40 years, but the wolves remained. Orla went back inside and prepared her breakfast oatmeal cooked with dried berries and a spoonful of honey from the hives she kept in the clearing's sunny corner. She ate standing by the window, watching the day arrive. The Elkthorn Range stretched in every direction, an ocean of peaks and valleys covered in old-growth forest. In autumn, the aspens turned gold against the dark green of pine and spruce. The EDTSP air smelled of wood smoke and earth, and the particular crispness that came before the first snow. She had lived here longer than she had lived anywhere else, longer than her childhood home in the valley town, where she had been raised by parents who were now decades in the ground. Longer than the 3 years she had spent married to a man who had loved these mountains as much as she had come to love them. This cabin, this clearing, these wolves, they were her whole world now. After breakfast, she checked her supplies. Winter was 6 weeks away at most, and she needed to be ready. She had 3 cords of firewood split and stacked under the lean-to on the cabin's north side. Her root cellar was stocked with potatoes, carrots, turnips, and onions from the small garden she tended each summer. Shelves held jars of preserved venison, elk, and rabbit, along with wild berries, mushrooms, and the various herbs she collected for medicine and seasoning. Orla had learned self-sufficiency the hard way. In the early years, she had made trips to Pinewood every few weeks for flour, sugar, salt, and other staples she could not produce herself. But each trip had been harder than the last. The stares from townspeople who whispered about the wolf woman, the questions about her daughter, the pity in people's eyes when they saw her alone. 15 years ago she had stopped going entirely. She paid a man named Vernon Hastings to make deliveries twice a year, spring and fall, leaving supplies at the end of the rough track that led to her property. She left payment in a tin box, along with a list for the next delivery. They never spoke. She preferred it that way. The townspeople had invented stories about her, of course. She was a witch who could speak to animals. She practiced dark magic in the forest. She had murdered her husband and hidden his body in the mountains. She lured travelers to their deaths. The stories were absurd, but Orla did not care enough to correct them, let them think what they wanted. Their fear kept them away, and that was all she asked. But there were other stories too, older ones, passed down by the Crow elders who had lived in these mountains long before white settlers arrived. They said Orla Venn was a protector, a guardian of the wild places. They said her wolves drove off poachers and kept the balance between predator and prey. They said she knew the old ways, the plant medicines, the songs that calmed storms. These stories were closer to the truth, though Orla would not have described herself in such grand terms. She had learned the plants from necessity, from books, and from trial and error, and from one long afternoon spent with a Crow woman named Josephine Blackfeather, who had come to her cabin when Orla was at her lowest point. Josephine had taught her about yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain, and wild ginger for settling the stomach. She had given Orla a beaded medicine pouch filled with herbs and stones and told her, The land will care for you if you care for it. Orla had never forgotten that kindness. She spent the morning checking her trapline, not for animals but for signs of intruders. The traps were empty and undisturbed. She reset them and moved on, the wolves ranging through the forest around her, alert and purposeful. They were not pets. They were wild creatures who had chosen to stay with her, and she respected the difference. By midday, she had returned to the cabin and was splitting wood when she noticed something wrong. The wolves had gathered at the eastern edge of the clearing, their posture tense, their attention fixed on something in the forest beyond. Sable looked back at Orla and vocalized a low, resonant sound that was neither bark nor howl, but something in between. Orla set down the axe and walked toward them. "What is it?" Sable turned and trotted into the trees. The others followed. Orla did not hesitate. In all the years she had lived with these wolves, they had never led her astray. She followed them deeper into the forest than she usually went, past the creek, over the ridge, down into a small valley thick with undergrowth. The wolves moved with purpose, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was still with them. Her heart beat faster. Something was wrong. She could feel it. They found her in a hollow between two fallen logs, half covered by leaves. A young woman, unconscious, her face pale as death. The wolves had formed a circle around her, not threatening but protective, as if they were guarding something precious. Orla stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat. The woman was in her mid-20s, dressed in hiking clothes that were torn and muddy. Her dark hair was matted with pine needles, her lips were cracked and bleeding, she was dangerously cold. But it was her face that stopped Orla's heart. The shape of her jaw, the arch of her eyebrows, the way her hair fell across her forehead, she looked exactly like someone Orla had not seen in 40 years. Orla knelt beside the woman, pressed her fingers to the pulse point at her throat. It was there, faint but steady. She was alive, but barely. Hypothermia, dehydration, possibly injury. If she stayed out here, she would die before nightfall. "Why did you bring me to her?" Orla whispered to the wolves. Sable met her eyes and did not look away. Orla made her decision. She gathered the woman in her arms, lighter than she should have been, all bone and muscle with nothing extra, and began the long walk back to the cabin. The wolves escorted them, silent and watchful, as the sun climbed higher in the October sky. Orla laid the young woman on her own bed, the only bed in the cabin. There was no time for second-guessing or propriety. The woman's core temperature had dropped dangerously low, and every minute counted. Orla worked quickly, stripping away the wet clothing with practiced efficiency, wrapping the woman in wool blankets she pulled from the tuperos. Chest at the foot of the bed, the wood stove in the bedroom was cold. Orla lit it, feeding kindling, and then larger pieces, until heat began to radiate into the small space. She filled 2 glass bottles with hot water from the kettle, wrapped them in cloth, and placed them against the woman's torso. Heat needed to come from the core outward, not the extremities. She had learned this years ago, when a trapper had stumbled to her door half frozen. The wolves waited outside, their presence a comfort even in crisis. Orla could hear them settling on the porch, the soft sounds of bodies shifting, the occasional low rumble of communication. They knew something important was happening. Once the woman was warming, Orla turned her attention to assessment. She checked for injuries, running her hands carefully over limbs, ribs, skull. No broken bones that she could detect. No blood, except from scraped knees and the cuts on her lips. The woman's hands were blistered, her feet raw inside boots that had rubbed them bloody. She had been walking for days. On the floor beside the bed lay the woman's belongings, a small backpack soaked through. Orla hesitated only a moment before opening it. If this woman died, someone would need to know who she was. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag that had not quite kept out all the moisture, were a few items. A water bottle, empty, a half-eaten energy bar, a folding knife, A rolled-up map of the Elkthorn Range with a route marked in pencil. A small notebook with entries written in neat handwriting, the ink smudged but mostly legible. And a silver compass on a delicate chain, engraved with initials on the back. Orla lifted the compass, turning it in the lamplight. The initials read L.V. Her vision blurred, her hands began to shake. Orla Venn, her daughter's name. But that made no sense. Lorelei would be in her late 50s now, not a young woman in her 20s. Unless Orla opened the notebook with trembling fingers. The first page held a name and contact information. Faye Lauren, wildlife researcher, University of Montana. The pages that followed were field notes about wolf populations, tracking patterns, and conservation efforts. Faye had been studying reports of an unusual wolf pack in the Elkthorn Range, a pack that should not exist according to conventional wildlife biology. A pack of 14 black wolves living in impossible coordination, led by an aging alpha female who had survived far longer than wolves typically did in the wild. She had been looking for Orla's wolves. For Orla. Orla flipped through more pages, looking for anything that might explain the compass, the initials, the resemblance that had nearly stopped her heart in the forest. Near the back of the notebook she found it a folded piece of paper, worn at the creases as if it had been handled many times. She unfolded it carefully. It was a photograph, faded with age but still clear enough. A young woman in her 20s stood beside a cabin, this cabin with a baby in her arms. The woman was smiling, squinting against bright summer sunlight. Behind her, just visible in the trees, were the dark shapes of wolves. Orla recognized herself in the photograph. She remembered that day, remembered her husband setting up his camera with the timer, running to join her and their infant daughter before the shutter clicked. It had been one of the last photographs taken before he died. She turned the photo over. On the back, in handwriting she knew as well as her own, were words written in pencil. My mother, Orla Venn, Elkthorn Range, Montana. 1983. Lorelei had kept this photograph, had written those words, had given it to someone. Orla's chest tightened. She could not breathe. The room seemed to tilt and spin. She sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the photograph clutched in her hand, and tried to make sense of what was happening. The woman in her bed was connected to Lorelei. That much was clear. But how? And why had she come here? As if in answer, the woman stirred. A soft moan escaped her lips. Her eyelids fluttered. Orla leaned forward. You are safe, she said quietly. Do not try to move. The woman's eyes opened dark brown, alert despite her condition. She stared at Orla with confusion and fear. Her lips moved, forming soundless words. Orla reached for the cup of water she had prepared, held it to the woman's lips. Drink, slowly. The woman drank, coughed, drank again. Color was beginning to return to her face. Orla's interventions had worked. She would live. Where? The woman's voice was a rasp, barely audible. Where am I? In the Elkthorn Range. My cabin. You were in the forest, unconscious. My wolves found you. Wolves! The words seemed to focus the woman's attention. The pack I was looking for. She stopped, her eyes widening as memory returned. They surrounded me. I thought I was going to die. They brought me to you, Orla said. They do not usually do that. They avoid strangers. The woman tried to sit up. Orla pressed a firm hand on her shoulder. You need to rest. You were nearly frozen. How long have I been here? A few hours. It is afternoon now. The woman closed her eyes, processing this information. When she opened them again, she looked directly at Orla. You're her, aren't you? Orla Venn. Orla went very still. How do you know my name? My grandmother, the woman whispered. She told me about you, said you lived in these mountains with wolves. I thought it was just a story. Your grandmother. Orla's voice was steady, but inside, her heart was breaking. What was her name? The woman hesitated, searching Orla's face. Whatever she saw there made her answer truthfully. Orla Venn. She was your daughter. The world stopped. Orla stood abruptly, the photograph falling from her hand to the floor. She walked to the window, her back to the woman in the bed, and stared out at the forest. The wolves were visible on the porch, dark shapes against the weathered wood. Beyond them, the mountains rose in endless layers of green and gold. "She told you about me," Orla said finally. "Not much. Just that you lived here. That you—" the woman paused. "That you chose the wilderness over everything else." It was not quite an accusation, but it was close. Orla heard the question beneath the words. "Why did you leave her? Why did you stay here instead of being her mother?" "What is your name?" Orla asked, still not turning around. "Faye. Faye Lauren. Why did you come here, Faye?" "I study wolves. I heard reports about a pack that should not exist. I wanted to see them." A pause. "And my grandmother died 6 months ago. Before she passed, she told me to find you. She said it was important." Orla closed her eyes. Lorelei was dead. Her daughter was dead, and she had not known. All those years of silence, and now there would never be a chance to break it. "I am sorry for your loss," Orla said quietly. "Did you know her at all?" Faye's voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. "Did you ever try to contact her?" Orla turned to face the young woman in her bed. This stranger who was not a stranger, this granddaughter she had not known existed. "That," Orla said, "is a very long story." "I'm not going anywhere," Faye said. Outside, one of the wolves howled a long, mournful sound that echoed across the mountains. The others joined in, their voices rising and falling in a chorus that spoke of things older than words. Orla listened until the song faded into silence. Then she pulled a chair to the bedside and began to speak. Faye woke to the sound of wolves breathing. For a moment, disoriented in the dim light of early morning, she thought she was still in the forest, still lost and dying. Then memory returned. The cabin, the old woman. The revelation that her grandmother's mother was real, was here, was the person who had saved her life. She sat up slowly. The body ached in a dozen places, but the bone-deep cold was gone. She was dressed in a flannel nightgown that smelled of wood smoke and lavender. Someone had tended her blisters, wrapping her feet in soft bandages. On the chair beside the bed, her clothes had been washed and laid out to dry. Through the window, she could see the wolves. They were scattered around the clearing in the pale dawn light, some sleeping, some alert and watching. They were magnificent, larger than any wild wolves she had studied, their black coats thick and glossy. The alpha female sat on the porch steps, her amber eyes fixed on the cabin door. Faye stood on unsteady legs and made her way to the main room. Orla was at the stove, stirring something in a pot. She glanced over as Faye entered, her expression carefully neutral. "You should still be resting," Orla said. "I've been unconscious for nearly a day. I think I've rested enough." Faye lowered herself into one of the wooden chairs at the table. "What are you making?" "Bone broth. You need to rebuild your strength." Orla ladled the steaming liquid into a bowl and set it in front of Faye, along with a thick slice of bread. "Eat slowly. Your stomach will not thank you if you rush." The broth was rich and savory, warmed Faye from the inside out. She ate in silence while Orla moved about the cabin, banking the fire, washing dishes, her movements efficient and practiced. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Faye could not stand it any longer. "You said you would tell me about my grandmother, about what happened between you." Orla's hands stilled in the dishwater. She stood there for a long moment, her back to Faye, then dried her hands on a towel and sat down across the table. "I do not know where to begin," she said. "The beginning is usually best." Orla's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "The beginning," All right. She folded her hands on the table. I came to this cabin when I was 27 years old. I had just married a man named Thomas Venn. He was a builder, a quiet man who loved these mountains more than anything. We built a life here. It was hard, but it was good. And then, Faye prompted when Orla fell silent. Then I got pregnant, and then Thomas died. Orla's voice was steady, but Faye could hear the old pain beneath the words. A logging accident in the valley. He was helping a friend. A tree fell wrong. He was gone before I could get to him. I'm sorry. It was 41 years ago. The pain dulls, but it never quite leaves. Orla looked toward the window. I was 6 months along when he died. I had nowhere else to go, no family left who would take me in, so I stayed here. Lorelei was born in this cabin in January of 1984, during the worst blizzard in 20 years. Just me and her and the first 2 wolves. Faye's breath caught. My grandmother was born here. She took her first steps on this floor, learned to talk with wolves, for playmates. She was fearless, even as a small child, would wander into the forest, and I would find her napping against Sable's side like the wolf was a warm pillow. The memory softened Orla's features. Those were good years. Hard, but good. What changed? Orla's expression hardened again. She grew up, started asking questions about the world beyond the mountains, wanted to go to school, meet other children. I taught her here reading, writing, mathematics, but it was not enough for her. When she was 17, she said she wanted to leave, wanted to go to the city, get a real education, have a real life. And you said no. I forbade it. Orla's voice was flat. I told her she was being foolish, that the world out there would chew her up and spit her out, that she belonged here, with me, where it was safe. Faye could imagine it, a teenage girl desperate for freedom, a mother desperate not to lose the only family she had left. She left anyway. She left anyway. We had a terrible fight. I said things. Orla stopped, her jaw tight. I said things I should never have said. That she was ungrateful, that she was betraying her father's memory, that if she left, she should not bother coming back. Did she come back? No. She called once, from a bus station, told me she had made it to Billings, that she was staying with a friend. I hung up on her. Orla's hands clenched on the table. I was so angry, so hurt. I thought, if I made it clear she was not welcome, she would realize her mistake and come home. Instead, she stopped calling. Months passed, then years. Faye set down her spoon, no longer hungry. She never came back here? Not once. Never. But she wrote to you. I saw the letters under your bed. Orla's head snapped up, her eyes sharp. You went through my things. I was looking for dry clothes. The box fell open. Faye met her gaze steadily. You never read them. Any of them? No. Why not? Pride, Orla said simply. Stubbornness. Fear. Take your pick. By the time I might have been ready to read them, so many years had passed that I convinced myself it did not matter anymore, that she had her life and I had mine. Faye reached into the pocket of the nightgown and pulled out the photograph she had found in her backpack. She laid it on the table between them. She kept this. My whole life, it was on her bedside table. She never talked about you, but she looked at this picture every single day. Orla stared at the photograph, her composure finally cracking. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched the image of her younger self, her baby daughter, her dead husband. She kept it, she whispered. She never stopped loving you. She had to leave. She had to have her own life. But she never forgot where she came from. Faye's voice grew thick. Before she died, she told me to find you. She said there were things I needed to understand, about our family, about where we come from. I do not understand. If she wanted me to know about you, why did she not come herself? She tried. 3 times over the years she drove up here. Each time, She made it as far as Pinewood and then turned around. She said she was too afraid you would turn her away. Orla closed her eyes. I would have. God help me, I probably would have. Would you turn me away? Faye asked quietly. Now that I'm here? Orla opened her eyes and looked at this young woman, her granddaughter, sitting across from her. She saw Lorelei in her features, saw Thomas in the set of her jaw, saw herself in the determination in her eyes. No, Orla said finally, you can stay until you are strong enough to leave. I owe you that much. It was not quite a welcome, but it was not a rejection either. Faye would take it. Outside, the wolves began to stir as the sun rose higher. Through the window, Faye watched them stretch and shake off sleep, already moving into the day's rhythms. The alpha female, Sable, Orla had called her, looked toward the cabin and held Faye's gaze for a long moment before turning away. They're incredible, Faye said softly. I've never seen anything like them. For the first time, something like warmth entered Orla's expression. They are my family, have been for 40 years. Can you tell me about them? How you came to have them? Orla stood and walked to the window. That is another long story. I have time, Faye said, and it seems like we have a lot of catching up to do. Orla was quiet for a moment, then nodded. All right, but first, you need to finish that broth and let me check your feet. Then we will talk about the wolves. It was a beginning, small, careful, but real, and for now, that was enough. The days fell into a rhythm neither of them had expected. Faye's strength returned slowly, and with it came a tentative partnership between grandmother and granddaughter. They were careful with each other, stepping around the raw wounds of the past like people navigating broken glass in bare feet. Orla showed Faye how to split kindling, how to read the sky for coming weather, how to identify the plants that grew in the forest. Faye helped with tasks that had grown harder for Orla's aging body, hauling water from the creek, climbing to check the cabin's roof, reaching the highest shelves. They did not talk much during these activities. The silence between them was easier than conversation, less likely to stumble into dangerous territory. But in the evenings, when the day's work was done and they sat by the fire, the stories began to come. Orla talked about the wolves, about finding each generation and raising them, about the bonds that formed between human and animal when survival depended on trust. Faye talked about her studies, about the wolves she had tracked in Yellowstone and Montana, about the science that explained what Orla knew through instinct and experience. 1 week after Faye's arrival, they were preparing dinner together when Faye noticed something. Orla had pulled ingredients from various shelves and cupboards, moving with the ease of long familiarity, and on the counter sat an old book bound in cracked leather. "What's that?" Faye asked, pointing to the book. Orla glanced at it, then returned to chopping vegetables. "My mother's recipe book. She gave it to me when I married Thomas. Can I look at it?" Orla hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." Faye wiped her hands and opened the book carefully. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with handwritten recipes in faded ink. But between the recipes were other things, notes about family remedies, pressed flowers, small sketches, and on the inside back cover, a family tree written in careful script. She traced the lines with her finger. "Your mother was Anna Brightwood. Your father was Samuel Brightwood." "Yes. And here's you. Orla Brightwood, married Thomas Venn in 1982. Faye's finger moved down. Lorelei Venn, born 1984. Orla's knife stilled on the cutting board. Faye looked up. "This is our family. 4 generations, all written here. Your mother started this tree. Did she know she was creating something that would matter this much?" "I do not know. My mother died when I was 19. She never met Thomas, never knew about this cabin or the wolves or any of it." Orla set down the knife. "She would have liked you, I think. She valued education, curiosity. She was disappointed when I left school to marry." "Were you happy? In your marriage?" "Very. For 3 years, I was happier than I had any right to be. Orla's voice was soft. Thomas was a good man, patient, kind. He saw this mountain and fell in love with it, wanted to build a life here, away from the noise of the world. I thought I wanted that too. But you didn't. I did. I do. But I never expected to live this life alone. Orla picked up the knife again, resumed chopping. When Thomas died, I should have left, should have gone back to town, raised Lorelei around other people, given her a normal childhood. But I could not leave this place. It was all I had left of him. Faye closed the book gently. She understood that. My grandmother. She told me once that some people are meant for wild places, that they can't breathe in cities. She said you were like that. She said that? She did. She also said, Faye paused, choosing her words carefully. She said you were the strongest person she ever knew, and that leaving you was the hardest thing she ever did. Orla turned away, her shoulders rigid. She told you this before she died? In the hospital. She knew she didn't have long. She talked about things she had never spoken about before. About growing up here, about the wolves, about you. Faye's voice dropped. She cried when she talked about the fight you had. Said she wished she had been braver, had come back sooner. I wish I had been braver too. Orla's voice was barely audible. I wish I had opened even one of her letters. I wish I had not let pride keep me from my own daughter for 40 years. The silence that followed was heavy with grief. Orla's for a daughter lost, Faye's for a grandmother gone. Outside, the wolves moved through the clearing, their dark forms visible in the fading light. They seemed restless tonight, as if sensing the emotion in the cabin. Finally, Faye spoke. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have said sooner. Orla turned to face her. I didn't come here just because I'm a wolf researcher. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. Faye reached into her jacket hanging by the door and pulled out a folded envelope. My grandmother gave me this before she died. She made me promise to deliver it to you in person. Orla stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. What is it? I don't know. She sealed it before she gave it to me. Said I shouldn't open it, that it was for you alone. Faye held it out. I should have given it to you right away. But I needed to understand who you were first. I needed to know if giving you this would help or hurt. And what did you decide? I think it might do both. But I think you need to read it anyway. Orla took the envelope with shaking hands. Her name was written on the front in a handwriting she had not seen in 4 decades, but recognized instantly. Lorelei's handwriting, still neat and precise, though the letters trembled slightly toward the end. The writing of someone who was dying. Read it, Faye said gently. I'll finish making dinner. Take your time. Orla looked at the envelope, then at Faye, then back at the envelope. For 40 years, she had refused to read Lorelei's words, had convinced herself she did not need to know what her daughter had to say. But holding this final letter, knowing it contained her daughter's last message to her, she realized how much of a coward she had been. I am afraid, she admitted. I know, but she loved you. Whatever is in there, it comes from love. Orla nodded slowly. She took the envelope to her bedroom and closed the door behind her, sat on the edge of the bed where she had slept alone for so many years, turned the envelope over in her hands, feeling the weight of the paper, the finality of what it represented. Then, with trembling fingers, she broke the seal and began to read. The letter was 3 pages long, written on both sides of lined paper in Lorelei's careful hand. As Orla read, tears began to fall silent at first, then accompanied by sobs that shook her whole body. She pressed a hand to her mouth to muffle the sound, not wanting Faye to hear, but the grief would not be contained. Lorelei had written everything, every regret, every memory, every year of love that had continued despite the silence between them. She wrote about her life, about marriage, about motherhood, about the granddaughter she was leaving behind. She wrote about the mistakes they had both made, and The forgiveness she offered freely, without conditions, and at the end she had written, "Let Faye know you, Mama. Let yourself be known. Don't let pride steal another generation. I love you. I have always loved you. I forgive you everything, and I hope you can forgive me too." Orla read the letter 3 times before she could bring herself to fold it again. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, her eyes were red and her face was blotchy, but something had shifted in her expression. Something had broken open that had been sealed shut for too long. Faye was setting bowls on the table. She looked up as Orla entered, her own eyes concerned. "Are you all right?" "No," Orla said honestly, "but I will be." She sat down at the table and they ate together in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Companionable, understanding, the beginning of something that might, in time, become family. 2 weeks after Faye's arrival, she was strong enough to help with the heavier work around the cabin. The mornings had grown colder, frost coating the grass in the clearing and ice forming at the edges of the creek. Winter was coming early this year, Orla said, reading signs in the sky and the behavior of the animals that Faye was only beginning to understand. They worked together to reinforce the cabin for the coming season. Orla showed Faye how to pack mud and moss into gaps between logs, how to check the chimney for blockages, how to organize supplies so the things they would need most were easiest to reach. It was practical knowledge passed down through generations, and Faye absorbed it all with the focus of someone who recognized its value. "My grandmother never taught me any of this," Faye said one afternoon as they split wood together. "She lived in town her whole adult life, had a regular house with electricity and running water. That was the life she chose," Orla said, setting another log on the chopping block. "I do not blame her for wanting it. Do you ever miss it? Electricity, hot showers, all the modern conveniences?" Orla considered the question as she swung the axe, the blade splitting the log cleanly. "Sometimes. Mostly in winter when my joints ache and the fire takes too long to warm the cabin. But then I step outside and see the stars without any light pollution, or I watch the wolves hunt in coordination so perfect it looks like a dance. And I remember why I stayed." Faye stacked the split wood in the wheelbarrow. "I understand that. When I'm in the field, weeks away from civilization, I feel more myself than I ever do in the city. My colleagues think I'm crazy, but there's something about wild places that—" She paused, searching for words. "That lets you breathe." Orla finished. "Yes, exactly." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of their movements synchronized. The wolves lounged in the clearing, watching with the lazy attention of predators at rest. Sable was closest, her massive head resting on her paws, her amber eyes following every movement. "Can I ask you something?" Faye said eventually. "You have been asking me questions for 2 weeks. Why stop now?" Faye smiled. "Fair point. I was wondering, do the wolves ever leave? Go off on their own? They range widely when they hunt. Sometimes they are gone for days, but they always come back." Orla set down the axe and wiped sweat from her forehead. "They are wild animals, Faye. They stay because they choose to, not because I keep them here. But the original wolves, the ones you found as pups, they could have left when they were grown. They could have joined other packs or established their own territories. Why didn't they? I have thought about that a great deal over the years. I think," Orla paused, choosing her words carefully, "I think wolves understand family differently than we do. The pack is everything. I became part of their pack when I raised them, and they made me part of theirs. The bond goes deeper than training or domestication. It is something older." Faye nodded slowly. "I've read about imprinting, about how young animals bond with the first creatures they see as providers and protectors. But what you're describing sounds like more than that. It is more than that. These wolves know who they are. They hunt wild game, they establish hierarchies, they communicate in ways I will never fully understand. But they also recognize that I am part of their family, and in wolf terms, family is not something you abandon, unless you're pushed out, like my grandmother was. Orla flinched. That is different. Is it? You said she betrayed the pack, your family, by leaving. But she was just trying to grow up, to have her own life. Don't wolves do that too? Don't young wolves eventually leave to start their own packs? Yes, when they are ready. When the pack is strong enough to lose them. Orla's voice had gone quiet. Lorelei was 17. I had already lost her father. I could not bear the thought of losing her too. So you pushed her away first, so it would hurt less. It did not hurt less, it hurt more. Every single day for 40 years, it hurt more. Orla turned away, her composure cracking. I know I was wrong. I know I destroyed something precious because I was too afraid and too proud to let her go properly. You do not need to keep reminding me. I'm not trying to punish you, Faye said gently. I'm trying to understand. Because my grandmother spent her whole life trying to understand why her mother couldn't forgive her for growing up. And I think if you could understand it yourself, if you could really see what happened and why, maybe you could finally forgive yourself. Orla was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was rough. I do not know how to do that. Maybe start by reading the rest of her letters. The ones in the box under your bed. I cannot. Why not? Because. Orla stopped, her hands clenching at her sides. Because if I read them, if I see everything I missed, every moment of her life I was not part of, I will have to face the full weight of what I threw away. And I am not strong enough for that. Faye walked over to her grandmother and stood beside her. They were nearly the same height, both tall women built for endurance rather than grace. You survived 40 years alone in the wilderness with a pack of wolves. You raised a daughter by yourself after your husband died. You built this whole life with your own hands. You're strong enough for anything. You do not understand. I do understand. You're afraid that if you let yourself feel the full weight of what you lost, it will break you. But grandmother, you're already broken. You've been broken for 40 years. Maybe it's time to let the wound heal properly instead of just covering it up. Orla looked at Faye then, really looked at her, and saw the truth in her eyes. This young woman who had stumbled into her life by accident or by fate, or by the mysterious wisdom of wolves, was offering her something she had not had in 4 decades. A chance at family, a chance at forgiveness, a chance to be known and loved despite her failures. I will think about it, Orla said finally. That's all I'm asking. They returned to work, but something had shifted between them again. The careful distance Orla had maintained was beginning to crumble. She was starting to see Faye, not as a painful reminder of what she had lost, but as a gift, a connection to her daughter, a bridge across the years of silence. That evening, after Faye had gone to bed, Orla pulled the wooden box from beneath her bed. She sat on the floor with it in her lap, running her fingers over the smooth wood. Inside were 40 years of letters, 40 years of Lorelei's life, offered to her in words that Orla had been too proud and too afraid to read. She opened the box, lifted the top letter, held it in her hands. But she did not open it. Not yet. That would require a courage she was still gathering, piece by piece, day by day. She put the letter back, closed the box, and slid it back under the bed. But for the first time in 40 years, she did not seal it away with finality. She left it where she could reach it, when she was ready. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. The storm arrived 3 days later, with little warning. Orla had read the signs, the way the wolves grew restless, the particular quality of the light at sunset, the smell of the wind, but even she had not anticipated its severity. By afternoon, snow was falling so thick they could barely see 10 feet beyond the cabin windows. "We need to make sure the wolves are all accounted for," Orla said, pulling on her heavy coat. Sometimes the younger ones get separated in weather like this. Faye was already dressed for the cold. I'll come with you. No. Stay here where it is safe. With all due respect, I'm a trained field researcher. I've worked in worse conditions than this. And you need help. Faye met Orla's eyes steadily. Let me help. Orla wanted to argue, to protect this granddaughter the way she had failed to protect her daughter. But she saw the determination in Faye's face and recognized it as something that could not be argued with. It was the same stubbornness Lorelei had shown when she decided to leave. All right, but you stay close to me. If I tell you to do something, you do it immediately. Understood? Understood. Orla went to the shelf above the fireplace and took down a leather pouch, worn soft with age and decorated with intricate beadwork. She held it for a moment, remembering the woman who had given it to her, Josephine Blackfeather, the Crow Elder, who had taught her about the plants and the old ways. Josephine had been dead for 15 years now, but her gifts remained. "What is that?" Faye asked. "A medicine pouch. For protection." Orla hesitated, then held it out. To Faye, "You should wear it. The land can be unforgiving, especially to those who do not know it well." Faye took the pouch carefully, understanding the significance of the gesture. She hung it around her neck, tucking it beneath her coat. "Thank you." They stepped out into the storm. The wind hit them immediately, sharp and bitter, driving snow into their faces. The wolves materialized from the white ghost, Storm, Shadow, Ash, and several others. But Orla counted quickly, and her heart sank. 3 are missing. The yearlings, Smoke, Flint, and Coal. Faye had learned all their names. Yes, they are young, still learning. Sometimes they chase prey too far and lose their way back. Orla turned to Sable, who stood waiting in the snow. She placed her hand on the alpha's massive head and spoke quietly. "Find them, old friend. Show me where they are." Sable turned and trotted into the forest. The other wolves fell in around Orla and Faye, forming a protective escort. They moved through the storm with purpose, following Sable's lead, the snow already beginning to obscure their tracks behind them. The forest in the storm was a different world. Trees loomed out of the white like ghosts. Sound was muffled and distorted. Faye stayed close to Orla, watching how the older woman moved, careful but confident, reading the land even when she could barely see it. "How far will we have to go?" Faye called over the wind. "I do not know, but Sable will find them." They walked for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. Faye's face was numb, her fingers cold even inside her gloves. She understood now why Orla had wanted her to stay behind. This was not a gentle snow. This was the kind of storm that killed the unprepared. Sable stopped suddenly, her body going rigid. A low growl rumbled from her chest. The other wolves moved into formation, and Orla put out an arm to stop Faye from going forward. "What is it?" Faye whispered. "Listen." Faye strained to hear over the wind. There it was, a high-pitched whine, frightened and young. The missing yearlings. They found them in a narrow ravine, cornered against the rocks by a mountain lion. The big cat was thin, desperate, driven by hunger to take a risk it would normally avoid. 3 young wolves should have been easy prey. But the yearlings had bunched together, making themselves a more difficult target, and the standoff had reached an impasse. The mountain lion saw Sable and the rest of the pack and tensed, calculating its chances. Orla stepped forward slowly, making herself visible. She raised her arms, making herself appear larger, and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Go on now, find easier prey. These are mine." The mountain lion's eyes flicked from Orla to the wolves and back. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, with a final hiss, the cat turned and bounded up the side of the ravine, disappearing into the storm. The yearlings rushed to Sable, whining and pressing against her. She nosed each one roughly, checking for injuries. Orla climbed down into the ravine and did her own examination. They were frightened and cold, but unharmed. "Foolish young ones," she muttered. "You will give me grey hair." Faye laughed despite the tension. "I think that ship has sailed." They began the journey back, but the storm had intensified. The wind drove the snow horizontally now, and visibility was down to a few feet. Orla kept them moving, following Sable's lead, trusting the wolf's instincts when her own were overwhelmed by the conditions. Halfway back, Orla realized they were not going to make it to the cabin before nightfall. The cold was too intense, the going too slow with the frightened yearlings. "There is a cave not far from here," she called to Faye. "We will shelter there until the storm passes." "How far?" 10 minutes if we can keep this pace." It took 15, and by the time they reached the small cave, both women were shaking with cold. The wolves crowded in with them, their body heat helping to warm the space. Orla built a small fire with dry wood she kept stashed in the cave for exactly this purpose. They huddled around it, the wolves pressed close. "This is not how I expected my day to go," Faye said, her teeth chattering. "Welcome to life in the mountains. You never know what each day will bring." Orla handed her a piece of dried meat from the emergency supplies. "Eat. Keep your strength up." They sat in the firelight, listening to the storm rage outside. The wolves settled around them, creating a living wall of warmth. Faye found herself leaning against Storm's thick fur, the wolf's steady breathing a comfort in the confined space. "Thank you," Faye said quietly, "for letting me come with you. For trusting me with this." Orla looked at her across the fire. "You have proven yourself trustworthy and brave. Your grandmother would be proud of you. Did she ever do anything like this? When she was young? All the time. She was fearless. Would follow me anywhere, do anything I asked. I took it for granted. Thought she would always be that eager child who wanted nothing more than to be with me." Orla's voice grew soft. "I did not understand that she needed to grow beyond that. Needed to become her own person. She did become her own person, a remarkable one, but she never stopped being your daughter. I know that now. I think I always knew it, but I was too stubborn to admit it." They fell silent, watching the fire. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating. They would be here for hours, possibly until morning, but they had warmth, shelter, and each other. For now, that was enough. In the darkness, surrounded by wolves and firelight, Orla began to talk. She told Faye stories about Lorelei as a child, the time she tried to teach the wolves to fetch sticks, the summer she decided to build a raft and nearly drowned in the creek, the winter she got lost in a snowstorm and Sable found her, curled up asleep in a hollow log. Faye listened, laughing and crying in turns, hungry for these glimpses of a grandmother she had never known as a child. And in the telling, something healed in Orla. The memories that had been too painful to touch became gifts she could share, bridges across the silence that had divided her family. When the storm finally passed and they made their way back to the cabin in the early dawn light, both women were exhausted but changed. They had survived the storm together. They had saved the wolves together. They had shared the weight of the past and found it lighter for the sharing. As they approached the cabin, Orla reached out and took Faye's hand. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable. But for Orla, who had not touched another human being with affection in 40 years, it was everything. Faye squeezed her grandmother's hand and did not let go until they reached the door. 3 days after the storm, Faye woke before dawn with guilt sitting heavy on her chest. She had been at the cabin for nearly a month now, and while her injuries had healed and her relationship with Orla had deepened, she had not been entirely honest about why she had come. She found Orla already up, as always, preparing the morning fire. The older woman glanced at her with concern. "You look troubled. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you from the beginning." Faye sat at the table, her hands clasped tightly together. "I didn't come here entirely by accident. And I'm not just a wolf researcher following a lead." Orla set down the poker she had been using to arrange the logs. She turned to face Faye fully, her expression guarded. Go on. When my grandmother died, she left me everything. Her house, her savings, her belongings. But there was also... Faye stood and went to her backpack, which hung by the door. From an inner pocket, she pulled out a large manila envelope. These... She laid the envelope on the table, between them. It was thick, official-looking, sealed with the stamp of a law firm in Billings. What is that? Orla asked, but there was something in her voice that suggested she already knew. Legal documents, a property deed, inheritance papers. Faye's hands trembled slightly. This land, the cabin, the clearing, everything you've been living on for 40 years, it isn't yours, it's mine now, because it was my grandmother's, and before that, it belonged to your husband. Orla stood very still. What are you talking about? When your husband died, the property passed to his next of kin. That was Lorelei. She was just a baby, so it went into a trust until she turned 18. Then it became hers legally. Faye opened the envelope with shaking hands. She never told you. She paid the property taxes every year, kept everything in her name, but she never forced you to leave or acknowledge her ownership. She just let you live here. Orla sank into a chair, her face pale. That is not possible. This land I have lived here for 41 years. If Lorelei owned it, why would she? Because she loved you. Because even after everything that happened between you, she wanted you to have a home, a safe place. She protected that for you. Faye pulled out a stack of papers, tax records going back decades, all paid by Orla Venn. Every year, without fail. Even when she had her own family to support, even when money was tight, she made sure this place was secure for you. Orla reached out with trembling hands and took the papers. She looked through them, seeing her daughter's name on document after document. 40 years of quiet care, 40 years of protection offered without acknowledgement or thanks. Why did you not tell me this when you arrived? Orla's voice was barely a whisper. Because I needed to understand first. I needed to know who you were. What kind of person would? Faye stopped, choosing her words carefully. My grandmother left me this. Land with a condition. Before I could take ownership, I had to find you. I had to deliver her message and I had to... She pulled out another document. This one, handwritten. I had to read this to you. What is it? A letter. Different from the one she wrote before she died. This one is part of her will. Read aloud at the reading by her lawyer. She wanted me to understand what she was asking of me before I agreed to inherit. Orla looked at Faye with something close to betrayal in her eyes. You have been lying to me this whole time, pretending to be lost, pretending to stumble upon this place by accident. I was lost, Faye interrupted. That part was true. I got separated from my hiking partner and I did collapse from exhaustion and hypothermia. But I was looking for this place. For you. The wolves finding me, that was fate or luck or whatever you want to call it. But yes, I came here with a purpose beyond research. And now... What happens now? Orla's voice was hard. You own this land. You could force me to leave. Is that what you want? No. God, no. That's not what any of this is about. Faye pushed the handwritten letter across the table. Please, read this. Or, let me read it to you. Then we can talk about what happens next. Orla stared at the letter for a long moment. Then, with a sharp nod, she said, Read it. Faye unfolded the pages carefully and began. To my daughter Faye, and to my mother Orla, if she allows you to find her. I write this, knowing I will not be here to see what comes next, but hoping that love can bridge the years of silence that pride has built between us. Mother, I know you have lived on that land for your entire adult life. I know you think of it as yours, built by your hands and my father's hands, and in every way that matters, it is yours. But legally, it became mine when I turned 18, and now it passes to Faye. I did this intentionally, with purpose. I want the two of you to meet. I want Faye to know where she comes from, to understand the strength and stubbornness that runs in our blood. I want you, Mother, to see what became of the family you thought you had lost. Faye, my darling girl, the land is yours to do with as you choose, but I ask you to consider sharing it. Consider staying there, learning from your grandmother, letting her teach you the things I never learned because I was too young and too angry when I left. Consider building a bridge I was too afraid to build myself. And Mother, I ask you to let her in. Let yourself be known. Let yourself be loved by the next generation. Don't make the mistakes I made. Don't let pride steal another 40 years. The land has always been a place of healing. Let it heal this family. With all my love, across all the years of silence, I remain your daughter. Lorelei. Faye's voice broke on the last words. She set the letter down and waited. Orla sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw. She wanted us to share the land, to live here together. That was her hope. But she left the choice to both of us. Faye wiped her own eyes. I can sign the deed over to you entirely if that's what you want. Or I can sell it and give you the proceeds. Or, she took a breath, we can try what she asked. We can share it. Build something together. You would want to stay here? Live in the wilderness, away from your work, your life in the city. I don't know yet, but I know I don't want to lose what we've started to build. I know that for the first time in my life, I feel like I have family, real family. And I think, Faye's voice dropped to a whisper, I think my grandmother knew that this place, these wolves, this is what I needed, even if I didn't know it myself. Orla stood abruptly and walked to the window. Outside, the wolves were gathering in the clearing, drawn by some instinct that told them something important was happening. Sable sat on the porch, her ancient eyes, watching the cabin. I feel betrayed, Orla said quietly. You came here with secrets. You let me believe one thing while knowing another. I know. I'm sorry. But I also understand why you did it. If you had told me the truth from the beginning, I would have sent you away, would have seen you as a threat instead of, Orla's voice caught, instead of what you are. And what am I? Orla turned to face her. Family. My granddaughter. The last connection I have to my daughter. She crossed the room and stood in front of Faye. Lorelei protected this place for me for 40 years, even though I had pushed her away. She gave me safety and security without asking for anything in return. And now she is trying to give me something else. A second chance. A chance to be part of a family again. So what do we do? I do not know. I have been alone for so long, I am not sure I remember how to share my life with someone else. But Orla reached out and placed her hand on Faye's shoulder. I am willing to try. For Lorelei. For you. For myself. Faye covered Orla's hand with her own. We'll figure it out together. One day at a time. There is one thing I need to do first. Orla went to her bedroom and returned with the wooden box of unopened letters. She set it on the table and looked at it for a long moment. Then she lifted the lid and pulled out the first letter. Will you read these with me? I think I need to know. All of it. Everything I missed. Faye nodded, her throat tight with emotion. I'd be honored. They sat together at the table as the sun rose higher, and Faye began to read aloud the letters Lorelei had written over 4 decades. They read about her life in the city, about falling in love and getting married, about becoming a mother, about the joys and sorrows of a life lived away from the mountains. They read about her longing to reconcile, about her regrets, about her enduring love for the mother she had lost. And with each letter, something in Orla's heart that had been frozen for 40 years began to thaw. She wept openly now, mourning what had been lost, but also celebrating what remained. Her daughter had never stopped loving her, had protected her from afar, had arranged even in death for reconciliation. By the time they finished the last letter, the sun was setting. They sat in the growing darkness, emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter. "She forgave me," Orla said softly. "After everything, she forgave me." "She did. And I think it's time you forgave yourself." Orla looked at her granddaughter, this gift Lorelei had sent her, and nodded slowly. "I will try. It will take time, but I will try." Outside, the wolves began their evening song, their voices rising in harmony. It sounded like celebration, it sounded like welcome, it sounded like family. The weeks that followed the revelation were both difficult and transformative. Orla and Faye worked to build something neither of them had. Expected a real relationship, grounded not in obligation or guilt, but in genuine affection and mutual respect. They talked for hours about Lorelei, about the past, about the future. They made plans, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. Faye would stay through the winter, learning from Orla everything she could about the land, the wolves, and the knowledge that had been passed down through generations. In spring, she would return to the city to finish her research commitments, but she would come back. They would share the land, share the responsibility, share the life that Lorelei had wanted them to build together. But first, there was work to do. Winter was settling in properly now, and the cabin needed attention. Orla's body, strong as it was, could no longer handle some of the heavier tasks. She had been managing alone through sheer stubbornness, but having Faye there made things easier. Together, they repaired the roof where age and weather had worn through the shingles. They reinforced the woodshed. They organized supplies with an efficiency born of two minds working in harmony. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, Faye brought up something that had been on her mind. "I've been thinking about the wolves, about their future." Orla looked up from the sock she was darning. "What about them? Sable is old, she won't live forever, and while the pack is thriving now, without proper genetic diversity, they could face problems down the line. Inbreeding, genetic disorders, that sort of thing." "I have thought about this as well," Orla admitted. "Sable is 14 years old. For a wolf, that is ancient. She could have a year left, maybe 2. When she dies," Orla's voice caught, "when she dies, I do not know what will happen to the pack. Ghost is strong. He could lead. Perhaps. But he is nearly as old as Sable. The younger generations will need guidance, structure. And you are right about the genetic concerns. I have been isolated here so long, I have not thought about the long-term sustainability of what I have created." Faye leaned forward, her expression earnest. "What if we made this official? Created a protected sanctuary for the pack, brought in wildlife biologists to monitor their health, maybe even carefully introduced new bloodlines to strengthen the gene pool. We could document everything you know about their behavior, create a record that could help other conservation efforts. You want to turn my home into a research project? No, I want to protect what you've built. Make sure it lasts beyond." Faye stopped, but the implication was clear. Beyond Orla's lifetime. Orla set down her darning and looked at the wolves visible through the window. They were her family, her purpose, the thread that had held her life together through decades of loneliness. The thought of losing them was unbearable, but the thought of them disappearing entirely when she was gone was worse. "I will consider it," she said finally, "but nothing happens without my approval, and nothing that would disrupt their lives or take away their freedom. Of course, this would be about protecting them, not changing them." They fell into comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and steady. It would be a long winter, but for the first time in years, Orla was not facing it alone. The next morning brought a surprise. A truck labored up the rough track to the cabin, the first vehicle Orla had seen on her property in over a decade. Vernon Hastings, the man who made her supply deliveries, climbed out, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Venn," he called from a safe distance, "got your supplies." More than usual this time. Orla and Faye walked out to meet him. The wolves appeared from the forest, surrounding the clearing but not approaching. Vernon eyed them nervously. "It is all right, Vernon. They will not hurt you unless I tell them to." Vernon did not look reassured. He gestured to the boxes in the truck bed. "Double order," like the note said, "plus some extras, medical supplies, winter gear, books." "The bookstore in Pinewood sent a whole box when they heard you had company." Orla glanced at Faye in surprise. "The town knows you are here?" "Small towns," Vernon said with a shrug. "Word gets around. People are curious about the woman staying with the wolf woman. Some think you're a researcher. Some think you're family. There's been talk." "What kind of talk?" Orla's voice was sharp. "The good kind. Mostly. Folks saying maybe you won't be alone anymore. Maybe that's a good thing." Vernon met her eyes. "Nobody here wishes you ill, Miss Venn. We just worry, is all. You've been out here a long time by yourself." It was the longest conversation Orla had had with anyone from Pinewood in 15 years. She did not quite know how to respond. Faye stepped forward, extending her hand. "I'm Faye Lauren, Orla's granddaughter." Vernon's eyebrows rose, but he shook her hand. "Vernon Hastings, pleased to meet you. Your grandmother, she have red hair, fiery temper." "That was my grandmother, yes. Did you know her?" "Saw her a few times when she was young, before she left. Brave girl. Used to come into town with her mother, both of them watchful as hawks. Folks said the wolves followed them even then, though nobody ever saw proof." Vernon smiled slightly. "Good to know she had family. Good to know Miss Venn here isn't the last of her line." They helped Vernon unload the supplies, and he left with a promise to return in spring unless they needed something sooner. As his truck disappeared down the track, Orla stood staring after it. "Are you all right?" Faye asked. "I did not realize." Orla paused. "I thought everyone in Pinewood hated me, feared me. I thought they wanted me gone. I don't think they ever wanted that. I think they just didn't know how to reach you. And you didn't make it easy." "No, I suppose I did not." That evening they went through the supplies Vernon had brought. Among the practical items, flour, sugar, coffee, medical supplies, were the books from Pinewood, a collection of novels, field guides, and, touchingly, a cookbook titled Mountain Cooking, Recipes for Self-Sufficient Living. There was also a note tucked into the cookbook, written in careful cursive on plain paper. "Dear Miss Venn, we heard you have company for the winter. Thought you might enjoy some new reading and some recipes to try. If you or your granddaughter ever want to come to town for supplies or just to visit, you would be welcome. Respectfully, the Pinewood Ladies' Book Club." Orla read the note twice, then set it carefully aside. "I do not know what to make of this. I think it's an olive branch. A chance to reconnect if you want to. After all this time, after all the stories they have told about me, people change, communities change. Maybe it's time to see if the fear and misunderstanding can turn into something else." Orla tucked the note into her pocket. She was not ready to go to Pinewood, might never be ready, but she kept the note. It was proof that the world beyond her clearing was not as hostile as she had convinced herself it was. As December arrived and the snow deepened, Orla and Faye fell into a rhythm of work and rest that felt almost like contentment. Orla taught Faye to read wolf tracks in the snow, to identify the subtle signs of illness or injury in the pack, to understand the complex social dynamics that governed their behavior. Faye, in turn, shared her scientific knowledge, explaining genetics and ecosystem management and conservation biology in ways that complemented Orla's experiential wisdom. They started a project together, a journal documenting everything Orla knew about the wolves. Each evening, they would sit by the fire, and Faye would write while Orla talked, recording 40 years of observation and insight. It was painstaking work, but it felt important. They were creating something that would outlast them both. One night, as they worked on the journal, Orla said something that stopped Faye mid-sentence. "I want to make this official. The sanctuary idea. I want to protect this land and these wolves so they will be safe long after I am gone." Faye set down her pen. "Are you sure?" "Yes. Lorelei left this land to you with the hope that we would build something together. Let us build something that matters, something that protects what we both love. We'll need to set up a legal structure, a conservation trust, maybe, or a non-profit. We'll need to work with wildlife agencies, get proper permits and protections in place. Then we will do it. You can handle the legal parts and the scientific parts. I will handle the wolves and the land. Together, we will create something that honors your grandmother's memory and ensures this place remains wild and protected." Faye reached across the table and took Orla's hand. "She would be so proud of you, of both of us." "I hope so. I spent 40 years running from the world. Maybe it is time to run toward something instead, toward a future that includes both wilderness and family." Outside, the wolves howled their evening song. Sable's voice, still strong despite her age, rose above the others. It was a sound of belonging, of pack, of home. Inside the cabin, two women sat in firelight, planning a future that honored the past while embracing change. For the first time since she had arrived at this cabin as a young widow, Orla Venn felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Not the desperate hope of someone trying to hold on to what they have, but the quiet, steady hope of someone building something new, something that would last. The winter stretched ahead of them, long and cold and full of work, but they would face it together. And in the spring, they would begin the work of turning Orla's solitary sanctuary into a legacy that would protect the wolves and the wild for generations to come. It was not the ending Orla had expected for her life, but it was, perhaps, the ending she deserved. And more importantly, it was a beginning. Winter deepened, and with it came a transformation in the relationship between Orla and Faye. The careful distance that had marked their early days together had dissolved entirely, replaced by the easy companionship of family. They worked side by side through the short days and long nights, building something neither had quite expected, not just a plan for the future, but genuine affection for each other. They started a new project during the darkest weeks of January. Faye had suggested it one evening as they sat by the fire, the wind howling outside and the wolves huddled together on the porch for warmth. "We should make something together, something physical, not just plans and documents, something that represents what we're building." "Like what?" Orla had asked. "A quilt. My grandmother taught me to sew when I was young. Did you ever make quilts?" "My mother did. She tried to teach me, but I was never patient enough to sit still and do the fine work." Orla had smiled at the memory. "Lorelei loved it, though. She would sit with my old scraps of fabric and make little dolls and blankets for them." And so they began. Faye found fabric in the cabin, old clothes too worn to wear, scraps saved from years of mending, bits and pieces of a life lived in isolation. Each square they cut and stitched became a story. Orla's wedding dress, faded but still beautiful, became a square that represented love and loss. Thomas's work shirt became a square for strength and sacrifice. A baby blanket Lorelei had used became a square for motherhood and regret. Faye added pieces too. A scarf her grandmother had given her became a square for inheritance and connection. A shirt from her field research became a square for discovery and purpose. Together, they stitched the pieces into a pattern, and as they worked, they talked. Orla told stories she had never shared with anyone. about her childhood in the valley, about her parents' death, about meeting Thomas and falling in love with both him and these mountains. She talked about the early years of motherhood, the joy and terror of raising a child in the wilderness. She talked about the fight with Lorelei, the words said in anger that she had spent 40 years regretting. Faye told stories too, about growing up with a grandmother who was strong and independent, but also sad in ways Faye had not understood as a child. About choosing to study wolves because they reminded her of stories her grandmother had told about the mountains. About feeling disconnected from family, from roots, from the sense of belonging that other people seem to take for granted. "I think I was looking for this," Faye said one evening as they worked. "Looking for you, even before I knew you existed, looking for a place where I belonged." "And have you found it?" Orla asked quietly. "Yes, I think I have." The quilt grew square by square, becoming a physical manifestation of their healing. It was not perfect, the stitches were uneven in places, the colors did not always match, some squares puckered while others lay flat, but it was honest. It was real. It was theirs. One particularly fierce night, when the temperature dropped below zero and the wind threatened to tear the roof from the cabin, they huddled together under the growing quilt with the wolves pressed close around them. Orla had been quiet all day, more withdrawn than usual, and Faye had learned to recognize the signs of old pain surfacing. "What are you thinking about?" Faye asked gently. "About fear," Orla said. "About how much of my life I wasted being afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that if I let Lorelei go, I would lose her forever. And I did lose her, but not because I let her go. I lost her because I tried to hold on too tight." Orla's fingers traced the pattern of the quilt. "I was afraid that the world would hurt her, that she was not strong enough to survive without me. But she was stronger than I ever gave her credit for. She survived. She built a life. She raised you. She did all of that without me, and I was too proud and too afraid to be part of it." "She wanted you to be part of it," Faye said. "The letters make that clear. She just didn't know how to reach across the silence. Neither did I. And now it is too late to tell her I am sorry. Too late to say all the things I should have said." Orla's voice broke. "I loved her so much, I never stopped loving her. But I let my fear turn that love into something that pushed her away, instead of holding her close." Faye moved closer, wrapping an arm around Orla's shoulders. "You can tell me. You can say all the things you wish you had said to her. I'll hear them for both of us." And so, surrounded by wolves and firelight and the quilt they had made together, Orla spoke. She spoke of love and regret, of pride and sorrow, of all the words she had kept locked inside for 40 years. She wept as she had not wept since the day Lorelei left, and Faye held her and wept too, mourning for the grandmother who had carried her own grief in silence. When the storm finally passed, something fundamental had shifted. Orla had spoken the words she had needed to speak. She had acknowledged her failures and her pain, and in doing so, she had made room for something new. Forgiveness, not just for Lorelei, but for herself. The quilt was nearly finished now, a beautiful, imperfect testament to family and healing. They added one final square, a piece of fabric from Lorelei's final letter, carefully preserved and stitched into the center of the design. It was the heart of the quilt, just as Lorelei had been the heart of this reconciliation. "She brought us together," Faye said as they admired their work. "Even in death she was still taking care of both of us." "She was always stronger than I gave her credit for," Orla said. "And wiser. She knew what we both needed, even when we did not know it ourselves." They wrapped themselves in the quilt and sat together in the quiet cabin, listening to the wolves settle for the night. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and patient. Inside, two women who had been strangers 6 weeks ago sat as family, bound by blood and choice, and the memory of someone they both loved. Spring was still months away, but they could feel it coming. Feel the promise of new beginnings, of work to be done, of a future they would build together. For now, though they sat in the present, grateful for this moment of peace and connection, the wolves knew it too. Sable rose from her place by the door and walked to Orla, resting her massive head on Orla's lap. It was a gesture of affection, of trust, of family. Orla stroked the old wolf's head and felt the years of loneliness finally beginning to fade. She was not alone anymore. She had family, she had purpose, she had hope, and for the first time in 40 years, that was enough. March arrived with the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing brown earth and the first green shoots of new growth. The days grew longer, the light stronger. The wolves grew restless, sensing the change in seasons, the promise of easier hunting and warmer days ahead. Orla and Faye had spent the winter preparing for this moment. The legal documents for the wildlife sanctuary were drawn up and ready to file. They had detailed plans for sustainable management of the land, for monitoring the wolf pack's health, for gradually introducing new genetic diversity without disrupting the social structure that had kept the pack strong for decades. But before any of that could begin, they needed to make a decision about what came next for them personally. Faye had responsibilities waiting in the city, a research position, colleagues who depended on her, commitments she could not simply abandon. The question that hung between them was simple but profound. What would their future look like? One morning, Orla woke to find Faye already up, sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee and a thoughtful expression. The wolves were scattered around the clearing, some playing, some resting in the weak morning sun. Sable sat beside Faye, her presence as steady as ever despite her advancing age. "You are thinking about leaving," Orla said quietly as she joined Faye on the porch. "I have to go back eventually." "I knew that from the beginning." But Faye paused, choosing her words carefully. "I don't want this to end, what we've built here. I don't want to lose you. You will not lose me. I am not going anywhere, but I will be. And after 6 months together, after everything we've shared, the thought of being apart," Faye's voice caught. "It hurts more than I expected." Orla sat down beside her, their shoulders touching. "I have been thinking about this too, about what it means to be family when you live in different worlds. I spent 40 years convincing myself that distance meant abandonment, that if Lorelei was not here with me, she had stopped being my daughter. But that was never true. She carried me with her, in her heart, in her memories, in the way she raised you. Distance does not erase love if we choose not to let it. So what do? We make a plan. A real one." Orla pulled something from her pocket, 2 hand-carved walking sticks, smooth and strong, made from mountain ash. She had been working on them in secret for weeks, carving them by firelight after Faye went to bed. "I made these for both of us, so we always remember that we are walking this path together, even when we are in different places." Faye took one of the walking sticks, running her hands over the smooth wood. Orla had carved wolves into the handle, a pack moving together through carved trees. It was beautiful, a work of art and love. "You go back to your work," Orla continued. "You finish your commitments, you do your research. But you come back, summer, fall, whenever you can. We work on the sanctuary together, we protect the wolves together, we build this legacy together. You won't feel abandoned?" "You won't." Faye stopped, the fear of repeating old patterns clear in her voice. "I will miss you terribly, but I will not feel abandoned because you will not be abandoning me. You will be living your life, pursuing your purpose. And then you will come back, and we will share what we have learned, and we will be family." Orla squeezed Faye's hand. "Your grandmother taught me something, even in death, that love does not require constant proximity. It requires intention. It requires choosing each other again and again, across distance and time. I am choosing you, Faye, and I trust you to choose me back. I do. I will. Always." They sat together as the sun climbed higher, making plans. Faye would leave in 2 weeks. After the worst of the snow had melted and the roads were passable, she would spend 3 months in the city, wrapping up her current research and beginning the work of establishing the sanctuary's legal and scientific framework. She would return in June, stay through the summer and early fall, then return to the city for the winter academic term. They would continue this pattern, balancing Faye's professional life with her commitment to the land and to Orla. It was not perfect. There would be loneliness on both sides. There would be challenges they could not anticipate, but it was a plan built on honesty and mutual respect, on the understanding that family could take many forms and that love was strong enough to survive distance. "I have something for you too," Faye said. She reached into her own pocket and pulled out the silver compass necklace, the one engraved with Lorelei's initials. "My grandmother wanted you to have this," she wore to it every day for as long as I can remember. It belonged to her father, your husband, originally. She kept it as a connection to him, and to you. Orla took the compass with shaking hands. It was warm from Faye's body heat, the silver worn smooth from decades of handling. She opened it, and inside, opposite the compass face, was a tiny photograph. Herself, Thomas, and baby Lorelei, taken on the same day as the larger photograph Faye had brought. "She carried us with her," Orla whispered. "All those years, she carried us with her." "She did, and now you can carry her with you." Faye helped Orla fasten the chain around her neck. "A reminder that you're never really alone. That family stays with us, even across distance, even across death." Orla touched the compass, feeling its weight against her chest, and felt something settle in her heart. A peace she had not known in 40 years. Her daughter had forgiven her, her granddaughter had found her, the wolves were protected, the land would endure. She looked out at the clearing, at the wolves, at the mountains rising beyond. This place had been her sanctuary, her prison, her penance. Now it was something else entirely. It was home, and she could finally share it without fear. "When you come back in June," Orla said, "we will take a walk together. Up to the high ridge, where you can see 3 states on a clear day. I will show you the places your grandmother played as a child, the spots where the wolves like to den, the hidden valleys where the elk gather in autumn. I will teach you everything I know, so that when I am gone, this knowledge does not die with me." "When you're gone is a long time from now," Faye said firmly. Orla smiled. "Perhaps. But whether it is soon or late, I want you to have everything. The land, the knowledge, the responsibility. You are my family now, the only family I have left. And I trust you to care for this place the way I have, but also to let it grow and change in ways I never imagined." They stood together and walked out into the clearing. The wolves gathered around them, sensing something important was happening. Sable pressed close to Orla's side, while the younger wolves crowded around Faye, playful and affectionate. This was family, not just the humans, but the wolves too. All of them connected by bonds that went deeper than blood, stronger than fear. Bonds of choice and trust and love. And as they stood together in the March sunshine, the last of winter melting around them and spring promising renewal, both women felt something they had been missing for too long. They felt complete. The day of Faye's departure arrived too quickly, and not quickly enough. They had prepared for it, packed her things, made lists of tasks to complete before her return. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were 2 different things. Orla stood on the porch in the cool morning air, watching Faye load her backpack into the truck Vernon had brought up the day before. The wolves were restless, pacing and whining, aware that change was coming. Sable sat beside Orla, her amber eyes tracking Faye's every movement. "Are you sure you have everything?" Orla asked for the 3rd time. Faye smiled gently. "I'm sure. And if I forgot something, I'll get it when I come back in June." June is a long time away. 82 days. I counted. Faye walked back to the porch and stood in front of Orla. We can write. I'll call from the satellite phone when I get to town. We'll stay connected. Orla nodded, not trusting her voice. She had spent 40 years alone, had convinced herself she preferred it that way. 3 months should be nothing. But the thought of this cabin without Faye's presence, without her laughter and questions and steady companionship, felt like a hollowness she was not ready to face. I started something for you, Orla said abruptly. She went inside and returned with a leather-bound journal, new and unmarked. I'm going to write in this. Every day. About the wolves, about the land, about whatever happens here. And when you come back, you can read it, so you do not miss anything important. Faye took the journal, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I love that. And I'll keep a journal too, about what I'm doing in the city, the progress on the sanctuary paperwork, everything. We'll share them when I get back. It is a good plan. They stood together in silence for a moment, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Faye pulled Orla into a tight hug. Orla stiffened at first. Physical affection was still strange to her after so many years alone, but then she relaxed and hugged back, holding this granddaughter who had changed everything. Thank you, Faye whispered, for letting me in, for giving us this chance. Thank you for finding me, for not giving up when I was difficult, for being brave enough to do what your grandmother could not. They broke apart, both wiping their eyes. Faye knelt down and said goodbye to each of the wolves, starting with Sable and working through the pack. They nuzzled her, some whining softly, understanding that she was leaving but not why. I'll be back, she told them. I promise. This isn't goodbye forever. This is just see you later. She climbed into the truck, and Vernon started the engine. As they began to pull away, Faye leaned out the window, waving. Orla raised her hand in response, the carved walking stick in her other hand, and watched until the truck disappeared down the track and into the trees. The clearing felt emptier without her. The cabin would feel emptier too. But Orla did not let herself sink into the loneliness. Instead, she walked to the edge of the clearing, where she could see the mountains stretching endlessly in all directions. The wolves gathered around her, a silent show of solidarity. Well, she said to Sable, it is just us again for a while, but not forever. She will come back, she promised. Sable leaned against her leg, warm and solid and real. The other wolves settled nearby, forming their familiar protective circle. Orla looked down at them and felt a fierce surge of love and gratitude. They had been her family when she had no other. They had brought Faye to her when she needed saving. They had known, somehow, what she needed before she knew it herself. She spent the rest of the day doing familiar tasks, checking the wolves, tending the garden plot she was preparing for spring planting, organizing supplies. In the evening, she sat at the table with the new journal and began to write. Day 1 of Faye's absence. The cabin is quieter than I expected. I find myself listening for her footsteps, her voice asking questions, her laughter at something the wolves have done. But the quiet is not the same as it used to be. Before, the silence was heavy, oppressive, a reminder of everything I had lost. Now it feels more like a pause between chapters. She will come back. We will continue our work. This is not an ending. Over the following weeks, Orla fell into a new rhythm. She worked on preparations for the sanctuary, marking boundaries, documenting the wolves' territories, making notes about everything Faye would need to know. She read voraciously from the books Faye had left behind, learning about modern conservation science and wildlife management. She even, tentatively, wrote a letter to the Pinewood Ladies' Book Club, thanking them for their kindness and accepting their invitation to visit when she was ready. She was not ready yet, but someday she might be. That was progress. The journal grew fuller each day. Observations about the wolves, about the changing season, about her own thoughts and feelings as she processed everything that had happened. It became a companion of sorts, a way to talk to Faye, even across the distance. 6 weeks after Faye left, a package arrived via Vernon's delivery. Inside was a thick envelope of legal documents, the official paperwork establishing the Elkthorne Wildlife Sanctuary, awaiting only Orla's signature to become real. There was also a letter from Faye, full of news and updates and counting down the days until her return. And there was a photograph, newly taken. Faye in the city, at her desk, the carved walking stick propped beside her, a smile on her face. On the back she had written, "Carrying you with me, always. See you in 36 days. Orla placed the photograph on the mantel next to the carved wolf figurine Thomas had made so many years ago. 3 generations now, represented in wood and silver and paper. A family scattered across time and space, but still connected. Still whole. She signed the sanctuary papers carefully, her handwriting steady despite her age. This was her legacy now. Not isolation, not grief, not the mistakes of the past, but protection, preservation, and hope for the future. When Vernon came the following week, she gave him the signed documents to mail and a letter for Faye. In it, she wrote about the wolves, about the early flowers blooming in the meadow, about her plans for when Faye returned. She wrote about love and family and the future they were building together. She wrote about coming home, because that was what Faye was doing in June, not just visiting, not just working, but coming home. To the mountains, to the wolves, to the family that had formed in the most unexpected way. Orla stood on the porch as Vernon's truck drove away, the wolves arranged around her like living statues. She looked out at the forest, at the mountains beyond, at the sky stretching wide and blue above. This place had been her refuge, her punishment, her sanctuary. Now it was something else entirely. It was a home meant to be shared, a legacy meant to endure, a second chance at family, at love, at all the things she thought she had lost forever. Some doors we think are closed forever can open again. Sometimes it takes the next generation to find the key. And sometimes the wilderness holds more grace than we ever imagined. Orla touched the compass at her throat, felt the weight of Lorelei's love and forgiveness. She picked up her walking stick, the twin to the one Faye carried in the city, and she walked into the forest with the wolves at her side, no longer running from the past, but walking toward the future. The mountains would still be here tomorrow, the wolves would still gather in the clearing, and in 35 days Faye would return, and they would continue the work they had started together. For the first time in 40 years, Orla Venn was not alone, and she never would be again. The story that had begun with mistakes and closed doors, with grief and isolation, ended with hope and open hands, with family found and futures built, with wolves and mountains and the enduring power of love across generations. And in the quiet of the evening, as the wolves sang their ancient songs to the darkening sky, Orla joined them. Her voice, rusty from disuse, rose with theirs in a chorus that spoke of belonging, of pack, of home. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And so was Faye, in her own way, in her own place, both of them carrying each other forward into whatever came next, together.